So Californian Bungalow in its setting did try to merge into its environment, into its landscape, rather than stand out from it, so that the pathways were more likely to be an S shape running from the gateway rather than actually on line to the front door. You had certainly the larger areas people were able to plant, and in other words, the ordinary suburban dweller that didn't have a lot of land to create a garden in was now able to think about it, and think about it in the round, in the sense that it was a detached house. They could landscape all around it. And then there was the motor car, which had to be also accommodated on the block, so that you had a driveway running down beside the house and out the front gate. So there's a lot of, instead of there being a front and a back, there was a lot of infiltration of the landscape running down the side of the house and out the back, which linked the bungalow design to the outbuildings as well as garden character. And typically people would have privet hedges along the front of the block, possibly as a reaction to the fact that along with the great town planning ideals of making the street a communal garden rather than fencing each lot off and leaving just a bare road between, was the idea that fences should be transparent, and so that the fences in the bungalow period were typically wire fabric. But with that transparency, people felt that they then had to put an evergreen hedge along the back of it. And so you had the privet hedge on the one hand, or for those who wanted the ultimate privacy, the cypress hedge. The privet hedge was archetypal along with the wire fabric fence for your typical bungalow, and then there would be the rose-lined pathway up to the front door, and that was the ultimate. When entering a Californian bungalow, some of the early ones were very informal in the sense that you walked straight into the living room without any form of passageway at all, which was quite different to Federation houses or Victorian houses. But your more typical suburban bungalows, you would go up onto the porch or the front veranda and past your brick piers and their stone cappings, and walk through into what was usually a timber-lined passageway, which would be paddled up to door head height or the top of the door, and either side of you would be double doors glazed, and one would go into the dining room, the other would go into the living room, and from there you'd proceed on to the kitchen and potentially bedrooms, fanning off that entranceway. So it was a little bit different from the previous styles, and certainly the passage itself had less emphasis and it didn't bisect the house as it did in the Victorian period, but some of that informal planning had already been underway in the Edwardian period. The bungalow took it that much further, in the sense that it, in some cases, did away completely with the passageway. You just went straight into the front room. The interior of the bungalow is sometimes thought to be, well, I think I've heard someone say that it was dark and dingy, but I think this idea is probably taken from the architect design bungalows, which, because they had the money and the time, they created very large timber-lined interiors, which would, in other words, be lined interiors over and above the passageway. And that wasn't necessarily done in your typical suburban bungalow, because the timber work, which was typically stained and lacquered plywood set into a panel. And so apart from that, you really had plaster everywhere, fibrous plaster, and the archetypal jelly mould type ceiling pieces, the centerpieces that had that geometric design that people now call Art Deco. But then it was part of perhaps the Australian approach to the interior decoration of the bungalows, apart from the American approach, which still had Spanish mission overtones and a ton of timber in there. We tended to go more for the plaster look, and with, of course, the plate rail potentially, or a picture rail running around at door head height, and all the timber work stained and lacquered. The interior of the bungalow also introduced other newfangled things, like the electric radiant heaters and gas radiant heaters that would be set into fireplaces. The coal fire or the wood fire was thrown away in most cases. Out the back you would have the two-fire wood stove, which might be a Lux stove, cast iron in construction, and there might be a water heater set beside it in a pressed metal lined alcove. The kitchen would be tiled. There'd be the scrubbed timber benches with the white porcelain sinks set into them, the big Shanks taps, all of those characteristics that you think of. The fireplace in the kitchen would have the high mantle, obviously for cooking on top of your stove.